The ability to heal our own bodies. We've been conditioned away from it, led to feel helpless and powerless. And what the science is showing is rarely are our bodies ever broken. We're beginning to look at the human body very, very differently. Every organ is capable of stopping disease, healing the disease that's present, and reversing any damage that's already been done. Super memory, super cognition, super learning, all these things that are available to us, it all begins in the human heart, and it is where our highest levels of mastery come from. We can harmonize the neural network in the brain and the neural network in the heart. We're the only form of life that we know of today with the ability to do what I'm going to describe. There's a beautiful place where science and spirituality come together. This is what gives us the evolutionary edge so that we can transcend the challenges that we see in our lives now that other generations haven't had. Every time one of us has the wisdom to know that we have a choice and the courage to choose and become a better version of ourselves, that's how we create the best world possible.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Know Thyself podcast. This episode is going to be a continuation of our conversation last week with Gregg Braden. We're going to be diving deeper into the human potential, the power and intelligence of the heart, building mind, brain coherence. And I think this is going to be a nice full circle moment from our explorations last week about the origins of where we come from, the time we currently face as humanity, transhumanism, and everything we discussed. Gregg, thanks for coming back on.
I am so happy to be here. I've been sitting in this chair for a week, waiting for this moment so that we could do part two. No, it's the same day, and it's an important part of a big conversation. And I just want to tell you, André, I really appreciate your patience with allowing me to unfold the stories as you have, and for the opportunity for this deep conversation. I think it's an important conversation.
I mean, the honor is mine, the privilege is mine. Thank you for being here and co-weaving this with me. And I just can already feel the impact of our last conversation and how this really will serve people, get context for where we're currently at, but then also give people a big permission slip to unveil and remember the power of who they are.
Yeah, I think it's important. And I'm going to be the first to admit and acknowledge with our community, a lot of the things we're talking about, some people are totally on board with everything we're doing. They're saying, yeah, I've always felt that. And for some people, what we're talking about, some information, I know it's a way different way of thinking. And so I appreciate your community, my family, is who we're talking to, just giving us the opportunity to share these perspectives. This is a tough time in the world. We're going through unprecedented. Young people have talked to me and they said, has it always been this way? And what I have to tell them is, no, it hasn't always been this way. This is an unusually turbulent time, a time the energy is so stoked, is the way that a lot of people say it to me. We're on the precipice of something happening, and I think everyone feels it. Something big is about to happen. They can't put their finger on quite what it is, but they know it's there. They know it's important. They know they're part of it. And so people are writing to us, live events, they come up to us, they comment on our social media. What can we do? What's happening is the big question. Number one, what's happening? Number two, how can we make it better? What can we do to make it better? And I think that's why this conversation is important. And last time we met in this very room, we talked about the big picture. And I think now we have the opportunity to zoom in on what that big picture really means to you, to me, to everyone that's watching this as an individual, to help people feel more at ease with the shift. There is a shift. We're in it, and the only way out of it is to go through it. We cannot stop what's happening, and we can't go back to where we've come from. We've got to go through it. And the question is, do we go through it and come out the other side with a soft landing, or do we make it difficult for ourselves? And that's where I think this conversation can be really helpful. So once again, this is a dance. I'm going to follow your lead.
Absolutely.
And let's go.
So we mentioned a little bit in the last conversation that the more that we truly know ourselves, the less that we fear the change of what is coming, because we know and we feel, and our hearts really do tell us how capable we are to adapt and evolve with the changing tides of what's happening. I think first off, just from our last conversation, when exploring a lot of these alternative perspectives, I feel like it's such a crime not just to be able to be open to exploring them, not to, and there's that, I think it's Aristotle quote of saying the measure of a matured intellect is being able to entertain a thought without accepting it, to be able to explore these perspectives and not necessarily accept them as truth, but as a possibility.
I appreciate that. So I'm going to invite with your permission, may I speak to our viewers directly?
Absolutely, yeah.
Can I look at the camera? What I'm going to invite you to do is this. First, I appreciate you taking the time, pushing the button that's bringing us together in the way that we are today, and this family, and this is a family that you've created around this work and your podcast. And community is so important right now. Everyone watching this, you have a belief system. It's worked for you. It has to, because you're here. If it didn't work, you wouldn't be here. So I'm going to invite you to take everything we do and in your mind, have a little file folder called possibilities. Put everything in those possibilities. It makes it really safe. It's just entertainment. The moment the universe brings something to your doorstep that challenges your belief systems and they fail you, what I'm going to invite you to do is don't struggle trying to make the old belief systems serve you. Bless them, let them go. Open this file folder called possibilities, and I think you're going to be amazed at how well this conversation serves you and supports you and loves you, because that's really what this is all about. The deep truth of our existence is all about us loving ourselves and loving one another enough to witness our joy as well as our suffering and support us as we go through this just outrageous time in the history of our world.
I think it's a powerful reminder and permission to be able to explore these things. And even in our last conversation, I've always had I feel like a healthy level of skepticism when it comes to exploring all of these things, because you don't want to have such an open mind that it becomes closed again to where you just accept everything.
A friend of mine said she has an open but not a gaping mind. So we want open minds but not gaping minds.
Exactly. But you also don't want just a closed mind where you're just stuck and callous in your belief system in the way. So let's dive into this conversation and explore some of these possibilities. As we are starting to see more and more, and science is becoming, like much of your work, also Joe Dispenza's and many friends of yours and mine are starting to use science as the contemporary language of mysticism.
Sure.
And where I want to start is actually the power and the intelligence of the heart, because we're seeing many examples, even in cellular memory transfer cases, where I would love to share a little bit about that 8-year-old girl, that story of when she had a heart transplant. And it starts to point at the power of memory, the power of our heart, and eventually, the human capabilities that come with it.
Sure. I am going to begin that conversation by reiterating a small part of our last podcast, where we're beginning to look at the human body very, very differently. From an IT perspective, information technology, from an engineering perspective. Our bodies, the scientists tell us we're about 50 trillion or so cells. Every one of those cells has an electrical potential, 0.07 volts. Small amount, you multiply that by 50 trillion, and it's over 3 billion volts of electrical potential in our cells. Every cell is a transistor. It massages electricity and information. It's a resistor. It's a capacitor. It is a photon emitter. Every cell emits and receives photons, which are light, which is information. So we're constantly broadcasting information on a subconscious level. We probably don't even know what we're saying to the world around us, to other individuals. We pick up on this as individuals. I'm picking up on your vibes. You're picking up on mine. There's a photon exchange that is happening there, an information exchange. Every cell in our body is capable of storing and retrieving and remembering, of self-diagnosing, of self-repairing. We now know that every organ in the human body, bar none, is capable of stopping disease, healing the disease that's present, and reversing any damage that's already been done. Pancreatic tissue, heart tissue, brain tissue, spinal cord tissue, if they are given the right environment. And this is the key. Now, the environment might be the external environment, but rarely is it the external environment. More often than not, it's the internal environment. Certainly nutrition is part of that. But emotion, the power of human emotion to direct the energy in our bodies through all those 50 trillion cells, has been sidelined by science. But our most ancient and cherished spiritual traditions have told us that's where the action is, front and center. This is the 45th year I've done this work in one form or another. And there are windows of time when it's good to travel and when I've had the opportunity to be with, I've had the opportunity to visit some of the most ancient and magnificent and beautiful and remote and isolated and pristine places remaining on the earth, the temples where they have the texts and the people that preserve the knowledge regarding what science is now discovering. So the science is revealing the nuts and bolts of how things work. But then they're saying, okay, what do we do with that? How do we apply it? Science is only about 300 years old. Say science began about the time when Isaac Newton formalized the laws of physics. For 5,000 years, our indigenous ancestors, they didn't try to focus on how things work. That wasn't important to them. They focused on applying what they understood in their lives. So we've got now the opportunity in this generation. We stand on the shoulders of 5,000 years of our most ancient and cherished spiritual traditions, giving us the tools and the science of 300 years now, telling us what those tools do, the effects that they can have. And the bottom line is, what works, let's do more of it. And for the stuff that doesn't work, let's don't do it anymore. And that's where we get to go with this. So all of the things that I have just shared about the human body, those 50 trillion cells and all of those, and there's more potentials that we could go into. We're the only form of life, André, that we know of today with the ability to self-regulate all of those functions. What that means is we're the only form of life that can sit down in a chair like this in a moment in time, on demand, at will, and say, in this moment, I choose to create a strong immune response. Who doesn't want that in this day and age? I choose to awaken my longevity enzymes. And if you do that, it's not just about living longer. If you're living longer, it means you're healing all along the way. And you're healing on really, really deep levels. So we're talking at the molecular genetic level. That's the only way to achieve that longevity. We're the only form of life that can sit down and say, in this moment, I choose to create more resilience to the change in my life. My life's feeling a little crazy right now. My friends are going nuts. Parents are going nuts. My government's going nuts. What am I going to do? We can create, not necessarily to change what's happening out there, but to change how we respond to what's happening out there in a healthy way. And that's the key. So the ability to self-regulate our own biology is a big part of our divinity. We talked about divinity in depth in the last segment of this podcast. Our ability, when we take these abilities off of autopilot, we accept the responsibility for our own immune response and longevity enzymes and resilience and all the other things, super memory, super cognition, super learning, all these things that are available to us. It all begins in the human heart. And this is where the action is. So I wanted to preface what I'm about to say with that. 1991, scientists made a discovery that shocked the medical community for sure, and the scientific community in general. What they found was a neural network inside the human heart. They found about 40,000 specialized cells. They're called sensory neurites. They're like neurons, brain, but they're not in the brain. They're in the heart. They think independently of the human brain. They feel independently of the human brain. They sense, they remember independently of the human brain. So right there, I've just said a big piece of information that affects all of us, and here's why. We all have had trauma in our lives, every one of us. But our trauma is perceived differently through the filters of our life experience. So your trauma might have devastated you when you were 3 years old, and then you tell me about it, and I'll say, what's the big deal? Or my trauma my father left our home when I was 10, and it traumatized me because it said something about safety in the world and not feeling safe. And I still deal with that. I'm still healing that. And I might say it to you, and you would say, what's the big deal? My dad left, and hey, piece of cake. The point is our trauma is individualized, it's personalized, it's unique, but every one of us has it. When we have trauma, it's registered in multiple places. And if you attempt to heal that trauma only through thinking and talking about it from the mind, it can help. And I think it's a good thing to do. But many people say, wow, I've done that and I feel incomplete. Now we know why. Because the talking or the therapies may not have addressed the thinking and the memory independent in the heart. The heart has a very different language. It doesn't always work with the words. So this is one of the amazing things that we're finding out about the human heart. When I was in school back in the 1950s and 60s, it's a mind blower to me to say that. But when I was in school in the 50s and 60s, I was taught that the heart is the master organ in the body, number one, and that it's a pump. And we all know it pumps really well, but you can build a machine to do that. Here's what the new discoveries are showing now, is that the heart, the brain's important. I'm sorry, did I say heart? The brain's the master organ in the body. The brain is the master organ. That's what we were taught. But the brain receives the instructions that tell it what to do from the heart. The heart sends those instructions based on the way we feel about the world around us. And those perceptions are all through the filters of our experience. So all of a sudden, the heart becomes front and center because we now know the heart is telling the brain how to regulate the body, number one. Number two, the heart, this neural network, is key in what we call heart intelligence. In the last episode of this podcast, we talked about how memory, information, our divinity, our imagination, our creativity, our innovation, our intuition are all information in the field that we tune to, rather than that information actually residing in these cells, in these neurons. Scientists they've looked at the neurons and they're saying, where's the memory? Where's the memory? Well, the memory's not in the neurons. The neurons are the antenna. They are a soft antenna, a biological antenna that is in resonance. They tune based upon our feelings and our demands. When we say, I'm going to learn Spanish, that's a demand to the body to build the antenna, to tune to the place in the field where Spanish as a language lives, where millions of other people tune in as well. So all of a sudden, the heart takes on a whole new significance in the scientific world. It parallels our most ancient and cherished spiritual traditions, who've always said that the heart is the seat of the soul. As my brother Gary Zukov wrote a book called that, my spiritual brother Gary, that the heart is the seat of the soul. The heart is probably one of the least understood organs in this respect. And one of the biggest mysteries is that on a particular day in the womb of our mother, in one moment in time, there's a clump of cells that are there, and in the next instant, something happens, and the first heartbeat begins. And scientists do not know what triggers that first heartbeat. There are theories. Talk about ion potentials across cell walls and things like that. If you ask our indigenous ancestors, when I was with the monks and the nuns in Tibet, when I'm with my Native American friends, when I'm with my Quechua friends or my Aymara friends in Lake Titicaca in Peru, my Yucatan friends, the shamans in the Yucatan and the Maya traditions, they all say the same thing. The first beat of the heart is the moment that our soul comes into our bodies. Our soul is part of, but it's separate from. It's a part of us that is ageless, timeless. It is the divine that is in that field. It's when the resonance between the cells in the heart and that neural network come into phase, if you want to think of it that way, with this part of the field. So the ability to self-regulate our own biology is a stunning ability. We're trying to build AI and smart computer systems that can diagnose and repair and heal themselves. And we can't do that with software right now. But if you think of us as an engineered biology, we have the programs, the soft program. We are literally a soft technology. So we're not a hard technology of silicon chips and wires and, software running through printed circuits. We're neurons. We're more than that. We are neurons. We're cell membranes. We are ion potentials moving across cell walls with the ability to self-regulate ourselves. We are so good at it that we take it for granted. And that is a stunning capability, and it is where our highest levels of mastery come from. Now, the next level of this is once we embrace the neural network in the heart, now you say, okay, we've got two neural networks. We have a neural network in the brain we all know about, now we have one in the heart. One of the highest forms of mastery and one of the deepest places for our healing. We're the only form of life that we know of today with the ability to do what I'm going to describe. We can harmonize the neural network in the brain and the neural network in the heart. Two separate organs become one powerful, potent system in what is called heart-brain coherence. And the ability to do it, it's very, very simple. There's an organization here in Northern California, there in Northern California, the Institute of Heart Math. They're a pioneering research organization in the power of the human heart in unconventional ways, beyond just being a pump. I've known them almost since their inception. I'm not their employee. I've worked with them. We tour together. We fundraise together. We do webinars together. They're dear, dear brothers and sisters, and they're really good people. And they've given me permission as an independent researcher to share and talk about their work. So I just want to acknowledge that. They've developed 3 very, very simple steps that allow us to harmonize the heart and the brain very easily based on the ancient and the indigenous traditions. It's a shift in focus, a shift in breath, and a shift in feeling. A shift in focus from the world out there into the heart, number 1. Number 2, slower breathing. And when we slow our breathing, and there is a little bit of science to this, when we exhale for a period of time longer than we inhale, we trigger the parasympathetic nervous system. It's the relaxation response. So it doesn't make any difference what the times are. It's just that the release needs to be longer, the inhale. So if you're inhaling for a count of 4, and then you release for a count of 6. Something that simple. That's step number 2. And then step number 3 is, while the focus is in the heart, while we're breathing slower from our heart, to focus a feeling. And this is something no other form of life can do. We're invited to have a feeling because we choose to have the feeling rather than relying on the world around us to give us a reason for the feeling. Now, you think about that. Most people, if you say, okay, a positive feeling. So let's say the feeling is a feeling of gratitude. Many people will say, well, I'm waiting for something to be grateful for. We're the only form of life that can initiate that. It takes practice, but we can initiate it at will, on demand. When we change the way we feel, we're actually shifting the chemistry in our bodies in many, many ways. Over 1,300 positive biochemical responses in the body from shifting from our mind into our heart, number 1, breathing slower, number 2, and feeling a positive feeling such as gratitude that works pretty much for everyone. Once we accomplish that coherence, that can be an end unto itself, or it can be the launch pad for deeper states of spiritual awakening and development and healing and health, physiological healing and health. Just from 3 minutes of that process, the immune system is strengthened, and scientific evidence shows this. The SIGA, first level immune response in the lining of the mouth, is strengthened more than many antibiotics can do. This is what the researchers found. We awaken the longevity enzymes. We trigger the healing of the telomeres. There's an enzyme called telomerase that is awakened from this process. We actually relieve stress, André, on a molecular level. So many people are stressed in ways they don't even know. So we all know about emotional stress, bad relationship, traffic on the 405 freeway, we know about that. When we eat foods that are cooked in oils that have been exposed to high heat, for example, that is a stress to the body, and the body has to work to compensate for that. We drink water that has impurities or the wrong pH. Our body has to work to compensate for that. Pollutants in the air. We're exposed to this stuff all the time. So those are levels of stress we may not even be aware of. And this coherence actually relieves that stress. It heals all the way down to the molecular level. And what the research has shown is 3 minutes, a minimum of 3 minutes, will increase the DHEA levels over 100%, which is the precursor to every other hormone in the body, male and female both. Increase that DHEA without taking any supplements or changing a diet or anything. And you decrease the cortisol levels, the stress hormones, by about 23% after only 3 minutes. And those effects will last up to 6 hours if, barring some black swan event that comes into your life. The effects will linger for up to 6 hours after only 3 minutes of doing this. This is how powerful we are. So the implications of the ability to self-regulate our own biology, they run deep in terms of divinity. Those are the ability to heal our own bodies. That is a godlike ability that the ancients talked about in the literature. We have it at our fingertips. We've been conditioned away from it, led to feel helpless and powerless, that we need intervention. And sometimes we do, and we have technology for that. And I'm happy that technology is there when it reaches that point. The point is to honor the gift of this body, this temple, as we talked about in the last podcast, to the point where you don't need that kind of intervention because you are maintaining through the ability to self-regulate all of these things. So this is really put science into a place. There's a beautiful place where science and spirituality come together, even though a lot of scientists don't like it. And a lot of spirituality or people that follow spirituality, they don't like it either. They like to think that the spirituality somehow supersedes the science. And the scientists like to think that they're more modern. But here's what happens when we drop those judgments and we allow the two great ways of knowing, the science of 300 years and the spirituality of 5,000 years. Those are two forms of knowledge. When we allow that knowledge to honor and serve us, we then create a wisdom that's greater than any piece of knowledge can be. And I think this is what gives us the evolutionary edge right now that many of our ancestors didn't have. They didn't have the science. So that we can successfully navigate and triumph and transcend the challenges that we see in our lives now that other generations haven't had. We now have this at our fingertips, the ability to self-regulate our biology through the changes. Does that make sense if I say it that way?
This is groundbreaking, and I think it's really important. And it's part of the matured individual to be able to be willing to abandon your worldview in the face of new evidence, in the face of new truth that points to the power or the magnitude of the human being. Even when you were speaking to the electromagnetic field of the heart and this story of the cellular memory transfer that happened in the girl that had the organ transplant, I think that's an important thing to reflect on as you're speaking to the power of the heart. We see so many examples in real time how the heart stores memory, like you're speaking to in these 40,000 neurites. And it shifts from this, we become a very logical, materialistic, reductionistic society that overly identifies with the intellect, which is a very important, valuable aspect of the human being, but overlooked much so the power of the heart.
Yeah, well, this is part of what's happened. part of what's happened is the term that's used is information silo. And we have such individualized, customized sources of information now. Our personalized YouTube channel or Facebook channel or whatever, whatever is Twitter feed or whatever it is. And the way those algorithms work is that once we show an interest in something, the algorithm says, oh, this person must want to see more of that. And so we begin to receive feeds only about that. And pretty soon it looks like that's all there is, omitting other perspectives, other ideas, other belief systems, and other worldviews. So many people, and again, I do this in live events all the time. People say, well, my religion tells me that this is true, or my biology teacher tells me this is true. The invitation, I think, André, for all of us is without judgment. Bless the ways that have served us in the past when we have learned. To excel, we've got to cross the traditional boundaries that have separated these ways of knowing in the past. Because the truth is, those boundaries don't exist in nature. Nature doesn't know the difference between chemistry and geology and biology and physics. We put those boxes there so we can feel comfortable studying it. Nature just says, hey, man, there's a world out here. Have fun, And so to the degree that we can allow ourselves responsibly, I'm not saying just go, willy-nilly, but to responsibly cross those traditional boundaries thoughtfully with research that substantiates and lived experience is a big part of that. This is where the wisdom comes from. And I'm making a distinction between wisdom and knowledge. So the knowledge is the nuts and bolts, tells us how things work. That's cool. What do you do with that? That's the wisdom of how you apply it in your life. And this is, I think, what's up for this generation and for our time in history right now. So you mentioned the story of, and I didn't get to that, of the heart. Anecdotally, there have always been, the first heart transplants, I believe, began back in the 1960s. I didn't know we were going to talk about this, and I don't have it at my fingertips, but I believe it's 1960s.
Dr. Pearsall, I believe, is an individual that helped study these particular cases.
Yeah, Paul Pearsall, and I think it was Christian Bernard was the first doctor that did the transplant. And there have always been anecdotal stories, and we laugh at them because they're funny. So, for example, and Paul Pearsall has collected these stories and categorized them so we can see them at our fingertips. One of the stories, there was a woman in her 80s, otherwise healthy woman. She received a heart transplant. Typically, your donor is anonymous. You don't get to know anything about the person that either the heart has gone to or is receiving the heart. It was successful. The woman, the doctor, it sounds like a joke. The doctor comes in and says, how are you feeling? She goes, I'm fine, but I'm hungry. He says, well, the hospital get you some food. And she goes, I don't want hospital food. And she had very specific kinds of food she'd never eaten before. She wanted beer, Dos Equis beer. She'd never drank before. She wanted French fries, but only McDonald's French fries and chili peppers. And her family says, well, hey, what's wrong with grandma? She's never had any of that before. They did a little research, and what they found was those are the favorite foods of the man. He was a motorcyclist who had been in an accident, lost his life. His heart was intact. Those were his favorite foods. And they said, oh, isn't that a coincidence? Isn't that interesting how she likes the same stuff that this guy, used to like? And that went on for a long time. The story that, and I think Paul talks about this in the book, that really broke the ice on this was a young girl who was being chased by a man who wanted to hurt her in a forested area. She tripped and fell. The man caught up with her. He assaulted her. He looked her in the eyes and he said very specific words as he was taking her life, and she died. And her heart was transplanted into the body of another teenage girl, but I believe was a little bit younger. And it was successful. Almost immediately, the girl began having nightmares. And the doctor, the surgeon said, I've done my job. This isn't my problem. You need to see a psychiatrist. the psychiatrist almost immediately recognized that these weren't dreams, they were memories. And they brought in a forensic artist from the police department, and they asked this young girl to describe the face of the man that she was seeing in her dreams that were recurring. And she did, and they put out an APB. The man was recognized. He was living in the community. They brought him in, and under questioning, he broke down and admitted to taking the life of the girl whose heart was now in the woman who was recalling the memory. Based on that information, he was accused, he was tried, he was convicted, and he is now imprisoned. And it was all possible because of a memory that resided with the heart. And notice I'm not saying in the heart. It resided with the heart of the girl who received the trauma. The man admitted to the words, the actual words that the girl was reciting from her dreams were the words that he used as he was killing her. And that was pretty much what tipped the scales. That got the attention of the authorities. And they said, how can this be possible? And this was part of the recognition of the power of this neural network and the fact that the heart has an independent memory of the cranial brain, feels, remembers, it thinks, it senses independently of the brain. And now when you think about us as humans, here we are walking this earth, we navigate these two realms every day in our lives, and we don't think anything about it because that's how good we are, most of us. And we are constantly doing this dance between what's happening in the neural network of the heart and the neural network in the brain.
I love this quote that I heard you say as well, that without thinking of the letters, listen to the language of the heart. And when we're building the connection to the heart, that story is so powerful. When I first heard it, I was like, holy shit. I looked into it because I wanted to make sure, check the validity of it. And it's just so powerful as to the memory that comes with the heart, as you were speaking to, the field that's connected to the memories or the neurites that are there. And this opens up a lot about the potentials of the reality of the intelligence of the heart.
Well, it does. May I jump in?
Yeah,
here?
Go ahead.
Because this is why I stated this the way I did. The 3-step process we went through in and of itself can be an end.
Which was shift focus, shift breath, shift feeling.
The feeling. All right. And those 3 minutes create those physiological effects. The coherence between the heart and the brain that's created from that can also be the launch point for some of our deepest spiritual and trans-spiritual experiences. So for example, deep intuition. When we want to access what some people maybe call our higher self, or whatever it is that you want to call it, the deep intuition, when we communicate with our heart, there is a peer-reviewed, I'm going to paraphrase the sentence, there's a peer-reviewed scientific journal. It was the Journal of Alternative and Complementary Medicine. The Institute of Heart Math contributed, it was their article, that said that the physical heart is now recognized as being coupled to a field of energy that transcends the limits of space and time as we know them today. It transcends the limits of physics as we know it, of time and space. This is why our prayers can be so powerful. This is why there was a woman that was documented. She was in the U.S. in Chicago. Her son was in the battlefield in Afghanistan. And there's a time difference, obviously, between those two places. She woke up in the middle of the night with a sense that her son was in trouble in the battlefield. And she called the commander at the base in Afghanistan, and they said, he's out on patrol. We haven't heard anything. Everything's fine. Well, come to find out, they had hit an IED, and he was alive, but he had been injured. She knew about it. She sensed that something was wrong. She didn't have the specifics, but she knew he was in trouble before his own commanders knew he was in trouble. And you say, well, how can that happen? Because time and space, when we understand the laws of the field, so 2012, scientists announced the existence of this field that underlies all of creation. Properties of the field, it is entangled. There's a property of entanglement. Everything's connected to everything else, and I can talk about that more in a minute. It is holographic. That means that the whole is reflected in the part, as above, so below. It is fractal, and we talked about that in the last podcast. The idea of entanglement, do you mind if I
Please
just share this a little bit? Because a lot of people, you know, I see this in the live audiences, everything's connected and people are taking notes. Yeah, everything's connected. Cool, you know. What does that mean? What physicists tell us is in the first few fractions of a nanosecond after the primal release of energy that began this universe, what some physicists call the Big Bang. I did a little research. They were male physicists that called it the Big Bang.
I wonder what a female physicist would have called it.
Well, I asked them, because a female physicist would have called it something like the first breath of the new beginning of the dawn of, you know, whatever. No, we got the Big Bang,
yeah.
And here we are.
Just like we want.
So what they say is within the first fractions of a second, all the matter, the physical matter in the universe was compressed into the space about the size of a single green pea. And they say it was like 17 billion million degrees Fahrenheit. I said, how do you guys know? And they said, well, we don't, but it was hot. Okay, so it was really hot. And I believe that. It was compressed. So think about this. Everything was compressed, and then the release of energy, all of that matter began to expand into the universe. It continues to expand today. The universe is still expanding. When it was in that green pea, it was connected. And even though it's no longer physically connected, it is energetically connected. We are all energetically connected to varying degrees. The heart apparently speaks to that field on a level beyond the linear, because we're taught that nothing can travel faster than the speed of light. There was an experiment that was done in Switzerland in 1997 called the twin photon experiment. Are you familiar with it? Have you read about this one?
Yep.
For our viewers that may not have, it was very interesting because what the physicists did was they took a single photon, they cut it in two because they wanted two identical photons, same properties. They used fiber optic cables, and they sent one photon 7 miles down this fiber optic cable, 7 miles, the other one down that fiber optic cable, and they're now 14 miles apart. And then the experiments begin. What they found was whatever they do to one photon, the other one acts like it's having the same experience at the same time. So here's a trick question. The trick question was, how does this photon tell this photon what's happening? So they used atomic clocks, and they said, what is the difference in time between when this photon has its experience and this one registered it? Atomic clocks. The difference in time was 0. It was simultaneous. There was no distance, difference in time, which means this one cannot be sending its experience to this one. This is why it's a trick question. How'd the information get from here to here? It didn't, because it's already there, because it is entangled. The property of entanglement was being proven in that experiment. So this is why a woman said to me in an event once, she said, how do I get my prayer from my living room to my kids who are having a hard time? The prayer's already there. Our job is to create the prayer. We don't have to worry about navigating it, shipping it across the oceans, over the river, and through the woods, to get there.
The power of as if.
Yeah, and you feel the feeling as if the prayer is already answered. And this goes a long way to helping us to understand how this field works, Andre. The field is neutral, and it can only act on what we give it to work with. So when we ask for something to happen, we ask for a prayer to be fulfilled, what you're saying to the field is, it's not fulfilled now. You're saying, please let this thing happen. What that means is it hasn't happened yet. And the field will reflect that not happening, which is very different than giving thanks for the outcome that's already occurred. Thank you for the healing that's already occurred. Thank you for the safety of my family. Thank you for a beautiful interview with André in his studio. That's my prayer. That was my prayer this morning. Because now you're giving the field something it can work with, and it is mirroring back what it is that we give it to work with. It's a neutral field. It doesn't know about good, bad, right, wrong. It's just going to give us back what we give it to work with. And this is a big part of where the heart comes in, because the heart, now scientifically documented in the Journal of Alternative and Complementary Medicine, is coupled to this field. They know it's coupled to this field. So this is science taking a big leap, saying, wow, there's something going on here. There's a part of our bodies that is actually tuned to communicate to the stuff our world is made of. And this is the crux of what our most ancient and cherished spiritual traditions have always said. The Institute of Heart Math took this one step further. In the 1990s, there was a Russian scientist, his name was Popodan, who began studies in the former USSR, now Russia, came to the United States and completed these experiments. And what they did was they took human DNA, pristine DNA that came from umbilical tissue. So it has not been degraded by ultraviolet light in a lifetime of toxins and chemicals. Pristine human DNA. And they isolated that DNA, they put it in a suspension in a tube and put that tube inside of another tube. And they had an individual hold that tube. And a couple things are going on here. First of all, what they found was when that individual was feeling what we would call negative feelings, so hate, anger, hate, jealousy, rage, fear, that DNA would actually contract. It would tighten up like a little knot. And in the presence of love and compassion, gratitude, appreciation, the DNA would actually relax so much to the point that it began to unwind as if it was going to replicate itself. Here's why that's important. For the DNA to express fully, it has to be relaxed. We all know that when we're in fear, we don't think well. Our certain chemicals in our body shut down while other stress chemicals kick up. We're at our best when we are in love and in joy, nurturing and compassion. This is the first time that human emotion was found to actually be able to influence, what it was that was happening. So the second part of the experiment, they took the DNA, which is the stuff we're made of, and they had a container of photons, which are what atoms are made of. Okay, so here is it's called a vacuum container full of photons. And they measure those photons. They're all over the place, just what they thought. No big deal. That's what they expected, okay? The stuff that the universe is made of. Then they take the DNA, the stuff we're made of, and they put it in with the photons. They measured it again. The DNA influenced the photons. The photons all lined up following the shape of the DNA. This is science telling us that the stuff we're made of has a direct influence on the stuff the world is made of just in nature. When we direct that through emotion and thought and feeling in our belief systems, we are actually influencing the world around us in ways that science has been reluctant to accept. But this is what our ancestors have always told us. So the bottom line, the stuff we're made of is, now notice I didn't say control, I didn't say manipulate, but we have the ability to influence the stuff our world is made of, including our healing.
Quick one, I love water. And sourcing good drinking water is foundational for optimal health. But not all water is created equal. And after trying over the years many different types of filtration systems for tap water, remineralization, restructuring, what I've landed on as the best drinking water for me personally is Alive Water. Alive Water is the only unprocessed fresh spring water delivery service available. And some of the benefits of the water are its perfect mineral balance, silica, and it tastes great. I've been drinking Alive water for over 2 years as Mama Nature intended, and I absolutely love it. Currently, they only deliver to most of California, the Austin, Texas area, South Florida, and this summer, Portland and New York. They also fully support the Find a Spring Foundation, where you can find the best sources for cold and hot springs in your area. You can go to alivewaters.com and use code KNOWTHYSELF for 33% off your first water delivery and everything purchased with it. Link is in the description as always. Back to the episode. It's such an awakening epiphany because in that example you gave of two particles 14 miles apart having a simultaneous experience, well, at that atomic scale, if that's happening and they're entangled, everything is also existing at the atomic scale.
Well, this is what helps the people to really embrace this concept. When they know about that experiment, those two particles, once they were the same particle, they were connected. And then even though they were physically separated by 14 miles, energetically, they were still connected. Once every atom in this universe was part of a single green pea that was really hot, of compressed energy. And even though those atoms now are physically separate through the expansion of the universe, they're still energetically connected. We are part of all that we see. And to varying degrees, we have the ability still to influence and to use. It's like the internet of the universe. This is why prayers are so powerful. I'm sure you're aware of the studies, placebo, where they take control groups, people who are undergoing medical procedures, and they have one person undergoing procedure and they've got people praying certain kinds of prayer, another one, no prayer. Statistically, the ones receiving the prayer have less bleeding, less swelling, they heal faster, and they're more successful for the same kinds of surgery. And so scientists say, isn't that interesting? What a coincidence. Well, this is how science will eventually, if science is going to be valid and remain relevant in our lives, science has to come to terms with the fact that there's more to us than our physiological body, number one. What we're calling divinity, we probably need to find a new word for it because the word divinity has a lot of baggage. I personally like the word because of what it means to me. But our abilities to interact with the world around us and the world within us in positive ways, at will, on demand, when we choose, sets us apart from every other form of life. I want to be clear, there are some animals that do this by instinct, but they don't do it consciously. They may know, for example, under certain conditions, their bodies will begin to create a stronger immune response. But the lizard didn't sit down and say, I think I'm going to go to that rock, and I hope nobody's watching, and it's safe, and I'm going to, go into this space and do that. They're not doing it consciously, on demand. We're the only form of life that can do that. So I think all of this speaks to telling us that there's something so unique. In the last podcast, I use the terms, and I mean this, something so sacred and rare and beautiful and precious that is available to us. And we are still striving in this iteration of civilization to come to the full realization of what that means. Right now, we call it humanness, what it means to be human. And I believe, as I said in the last interview, that it's vital that we come to that realization quickly because we're on the precipice. We're about to give our humanness away to transhumanism. Machines, synthetics, AI, chemicals that mimic our immune response, but they don't mimic it as well as we create it in our own bodies. We're about to give ourselves away to those things. And this is the thing. A lot of young people say, okay, well, we'll just stop doing it and go back to what we used to do. You can't do that. Once you give that part of your humanness away, once neurons believe they are no longer necessary because a computer chip is doing what the neurons used to do. Once other neurons that used to be used for creativity and imagination and innovation are entertained through a visor where everything is being done in an AI world for that person. They're no longer engaged in the creative process. They're observers. And the part of their brain and their physiology, their emotions and their hormones that all respond to that begin to atrophy. And that happens pretty quickly in young people. Once we do that in a generation, the next generation, that information is passed on through what we call epigenetics. Once the epigenetics say, oh, well, maybe you don't need the immune system anymore because you're taking a shot every 6 months or something that does that for you, then your immune system says, oh, you don't need me anymore. I won't do the work that I've done for 200,000 years. And I think this is really important. We have been here at least 200,000 years, and we're the product. Our blood is the product of a chemical formula that has been honed and refined to serve us over those 200,000 years. And I think the arrogance of the scientific community to believe that somehow we can hack that for a specific purpose, bypassing all of the other purposes that immune system is set up to do. I think that is a dangerous arrogance, and it's only one example of where transhumanism, I think, threatens not only our species, but our very existence if we are not aware of what is happening. And ultimately, I'll tell you where I think this is going. And we're seeing it. This isn't in the future. It's happening right now. We are becoming two societies. We're going to become two parallel societies. There's going to be one group of us, and some of them are my dear friends, colleagues, brothers, and sisters, and I'm watching this happen, who are all in on everything, on all the latest gadgets, on all the technology, on all the transhumanism, everything that they can do to hack or tweak, inject, place, insert into their bodies in any way. They're all in on that. And that is leading us to a hybridization of our humanness. We're no longer pure human.
Post-human.
Post-human is actually what Nick Bostrom calls it, the futurist. There's another segment of our society, and I'll tell you where I see them is I live in a rural community in northern New Mexico. When I'm not here doing what I'm doing with you right now, I go to my little co-op. And this is where I see the people in my community. Most of them aren't having this conversation because they're struggling to survive. It is an economically depressed area. Many of them have multiple jobs. They're trying to raise their kids. They're trying to stay healthy. And when I see them in the aisles, and we'll talk for a minute, and here's what they'll say to me. They'll say, Gregg, we don't know exactly what's happening, but it's happening too fast. And it's happening to us. Something is out of control. We've got to slow down. We have to go back to basics. We have to go back to a more basic kind of life. So what they're doing is they're growing their own food. And the stuff they can't grow, they'll come to the co-op and they'll pick it up. But they're saying, we need to grow our own food. We don't know what's in the food that our kids are eating anymore. They're taking their kids out of public schools because the kids are being taught things that don't serve them and actually harm them in terms of their development and the way that they are taught to navigate what it means to be a human, an adult in the world. They're saying, we can do a better job. We're teaching our own kids. About 40%. Estimates are about 40% of the young people in northern New Mexico are now no longer public schools. They said, we need to unplug from the technology. And so they either limit or forbid their kids from being engaged. And maybe they'll let them, be on a computer for an hour after dinner or something, but that's it. So they don't know exactly what's happening, but they have a sense that we need to go back to something more basic. Those two societies are developing right now. And honestly, you can't make this stuff up. This is like the theme of a very dystopian, post-apocalyptic science fiction film where you see the high-tech cities and people plugged into the grid and the AI that wakes them up in the morning and tells them what their blood pressure is and what their glucose levels are and what they're going to have for a meal, then you see the people in the rural areas out on the farms growing their own food who've been ostracized from and forbidden to participate in the things that are in these high-tech environments. That's happening. It's not going to. It's already happening. And I think we're going to see even more and more until it won't last forever. Here's what will happen, in my estimation. I think we're going to do what humans always do. We're going to check each other out. And we're going to say who's happier, who's healthier, whose lives are more fulfilled, who has a deeper relationship with their partners, with whatever we believe our Creator is. I'm looking at a picture behind you right now as I'm saying this. With God, if you want to say that, and with the earth, who is happier? And the answer to that question, who's happier, healthier, more fulfilled, that will determine ultimately, I think, where we go as a species. But I think we're going to go through, we're in it. The only way out of it is to go through it. We're going to have to go through this separation of the tech, the high tech and the low tech. But even the low tech, once we embrace our humanness, we are less complicated but more sophisticated than the high tech because we are the technology. We are the technology that we're looking for, that we're trying to build out there. We are that technology. And I think that's ultimately where we're going.
I definitely also very much so see that dance between our ancient intelligence versus this artificial intelligence. And I also can very much so see these two factions or societies that are building. I also believe that there can be a healthy synthesis of welcoming technology that can support us without neglecting the power and the intelligence of our biology and our humanness. I feel like I'm under that camp. And where I want to take this is because you were speaking to the fact that all possibilities exist in the field as potential. I have had many experiences, and I'm sure you probably have as well, with some key individuals throughout my life and throughout my path. Some psychics, some monks that have been able to, with clarity of vision, see things in me that I haven't been able to see in myself. Or in the case of a couple psychics, which I'm pretty skeptical around in general, but were able to say things to me that no other human possibly would know, right? So I'm like, okay, something's happening here. They know, they couldn't Google any of this. They don't know anybody that we've never met before. They just know my name, things that are happening internally, things about past ones. Mind-blowing, and it just opens my mind up personally to like, okay, consciousness is clearly much more vast than we've been led to believe. And so I just want to speak into this field that we have the potential with our mind as an antenna to select the vibration and the frequency of what we want, use the power of the heart to amplify that and bring forth things from the immaterial.
Sure. Yeah, we've got a future guest coming on who's going to talk about this. My dear spiritual brother of over 30 years, my colleague and friend Bruce Lipton, talks about this. The example he gives is he'll show a tuning fork and 4 glasses. And one of those glasses is going to resonate to that tuning fork, and it's the one that will shatter and break. That's how you know that there's a resonance there. We are those tuning forks. And we are whatever it is that the vibration that we're creating is a composite of our thoughts, feelings, emotions, beliefs, is what we are resonating with in that field, and we'll begin to see more of it and maybe bring it into our lives. What you just described is what makes intelligence agencies crazy, because there are no secrets. There's information that resides in a field, and if we understand how to navigate that field, that information is accessible. This is what remote viewing is all about. Very, very real remote viewing, which actually begins in the heart as well, communicating with that field. This was validated in 1990. The U.S. military used remote viewing, trained remote viewers to find Scud missiles in the Iraqi desert without risking troops going in and losing their lives. And the success rate was just phenomenal. The science of remote viewing began at Stanford University officially. I mean, other people had been doing it, obviously, for centuries, like Nostradamus. But officially, through the SRI, Stanford Research Institute, and remote viewing is only possible because of our ability to navigate our awareness in this soup, this quantum soup that we call the field of reality. The things that the psychics see about you is, if they're good psychics, they are empaths, and they are able to feel into those places. They get to know you in just a few moments. And once they tune into your vibe, your frequency, then they can go into the field that matches that. And that's where, and they may not know consciously, they may not say this is what I'm doing, but that's how it works. And they can see, there are no secrets. They can see our past. They can see potential futures. And that's always a little tricky.
Yeah.
Not
about super deterministic.
Yeah, talking about people's futures. But they can see things in the past. And realities in the present moment that sometimes it's hard for us to see because we're in it. When you're in it, it's hard to see it when you're in it. So as an observer, they can see things sometimes and give insights that can be useful.
So this principle applied in our daily life, like you said, we have the potential capacity, I suppose, at will to, using our mirror neurons or Cubelli neurons, be able to match what we want. And these neurons don't know the difference in many ways, like you spoke to, and many others, about the difference of visualizing something or actually physically witnessing it and experiencing it. Why does that become an important realization when you decide what to feed them?
Yeah, because the science that really bore this out, there were a series of scans, brain scans. We're getting really good at brain scans now, real time. And there was a classic example. I show this in our live events, where they'll do the top, left, and right, front, and back scans of the brain of an individual, same individual that is having an experience, and you can see the parts of the brain that light up during that experience. So the classic scan is the individual is physically reaching with their hand for a cup, a glass, and there's parts of the brains that light up. Everybody knows that, no big deal, no surprise. Then the next one, the second scan, is that same individual is watching another person reach for a cup. They're not doing it themselves. The mirror neurons, the Cubelli neurons, and for anybody that's not familiar, Cubelli neurons are neurons that fire when we have an experience and when we witness the experience. All right? So when they witness someone else lifting a cup, those neurons are firing off. This is why we can sit on the couch on a Sunday afternoon, watch a soccer game. Our heart's racing, maybe we're perspiring, we're excited, but we're not even moving. But our mirror neurons don't know the difference between witnessing the experience and having the experience on that level.
Just like before we were playing guitar and you were playing the Watchtower on guitar, and me witnessing you, that were lighting up my mirror neurons to be able to do so.
I love it. I love it when that happens. So the kicker, now here's where it gets really important, is the third scan showed the same individual not reaching, not watching someone else reach, but imagining, visualizing that they were reaching for the cup. Same parts of the brain light up. The reason this is important, and this is what you asked, is because the visualization can be with our eyes or it can be in our mind. And the way we think of ourselves and the way we see ourselves in the world is constantly feeding those mirror neurons. We are programmed through media to feel sick, to feel we are lacking and flawed and that we need something outside of our bodies. I don't even have a TV at home, but when I'm in a hotel, if I turn on the hotel TV, every commercial is a pharmaceutical commercial saying, if you have any of these symptoms, well, of course, everybody's got some. If you feel warm sometimes, oh man, I felt warm last night,
Quick fact, 75% of the advertising budget in the past few years was spent from the pharmaceutical. And only a couple of companies in the pharmaceutical were doing it. That's crazy.
So we're programmed to feel sick.
Fear.
What happens when we feed ourselves? My brother Joe and I, Joe Dispenza, we toured together for years. He's doing his own thing now. It's a whole different world Joe's in.
He's coming back in here soon too.
When he does, give him my love. Say Gregg sends his love.
Yeah.
He's a good brother. And Bruce as well. Bruce, Joe, and I used to tour together.
Three Amigos.
Three Amigos years ago. And we're not doing that now, but our hearts are still there. So he talks about that was one of the ways that he healed his body was through that visualization process. But it's not just a fleeting image. There's a skill. And this is where coherence comes in. Once you create the coherence in your body, now, we didn't really talk about this, but this is why this is important. If you try to solve your problems with your brain, some problems are good to be solved with. If you're an engineer building a space shuttle, the brain is good. You want to use that. But the brain, we have a left and a right brain. They function very differently. The right brain, more intuitive, colors, emotions, sensations. Left brain, logic, shapes, angles, mathematics, things like that. The point is, it's polarity. If you try to solve a problem in a relationship, should I stay or should I go? There's a song in there. Or a job, should I stay or should I go? Or a health problem. If you try to solve that through the polarity of the brain will do what it does best. It will answer you in polarity. And polarity, you're always going to have a right and a wrong, and a good and a bad, and a healed and a sick, and a success and a failure, and a worthy and a not worthy. And the beauty of the heart is there is no left and right heart when it comes to the energetics. Part of my heritage is Cherokee, Southeastern Cherokee. And there's a word in Cherokee that doesn't exist in the English language. It's two words, Shante Ishta. And Shante Ishta means the single eye of the heart. The eye that sees what is. So if you want to know the truth, don't ask your heart unless you can handle the truth, as the saying goes. Can you handle the truth? When you're in coherence, go through those 3 steps, and you begin to ask your heart, my heart. You say the words, my heart, so there's no ambiguity about what you're asking. You're asking this network right here. My heart, what is the meaning of the dream that I was shown last night? Or what is the meaning? What am I learning in this relationship that I'm in right now? Why is my body showing me this illness right now? Anything. And your heart will answer objectively. And this is a really powerful tool. I was the youngest. I was the youngest in the boardroom when I worked in the defense industry during the Cold War years in the 80s. And I would often come in with ideas that were a little out of the box. And I'd take a hit. I'd get a lot of criticism. And I was just learning about coherence. And if I didn't go into that coherent space, I would tend to hear it as criticism and react in ways that I was sorry for after. But if you can be in your heart, in a coherent space, you still get the criticism, but you hear it more objectively, and it doesn't have the same negative impact, and it empowers you or me as an individual to be in our own power, to listen to the criticism of others without a knee-jerk reaction, and then maybe responding in a healthy, constructive way. But this is all the power of the human heart. We're only beginning to understand in scientific terms, whereas the monks and the nuns, when I'm in Tibet, the shaman in the Yucatan and the healers, the shaman in the Andes Mountains, the Q'ero, they use these techniques. They don't talk about it as a scientist, and they don't ask the same kinds of questions because those aren't important to them. But the power of the heart. And if you watch a healer or a channeler, anybody doing channeling, what they'll always do is they'll close their eyes, begin with a deep breath, and that breath is awakening the parasympathetic nervous system. And often you'll see them touch their heart, or they will go into their heart to begin that process.
I love how you spoke to this idea of, Einstein has that quote of, we can't solve a problem with the same level of consciousness that created it. I have a dear brother, Peter Crowan, and we were in discussion the other day talking about how the mind has these fears. It's a future-based proposition that it created. It itself created a future that it is fearful of. that same brain is then trying to reconcile the fear of a made up future that it itself made up. And we are in a prison of sorts in our own mind. It's very cyclical. And you're speaking to the power of tapping into the heart coherence and the unification of the brain and the heart and the mind and the heart.
Well, it'll break that cycle. And I know a lot of our viewers, they call me, they write to me. People are dealing with overwhelming amounts of anxiety, panic, nervousness, fear, sleeplessness, a lot of different reasons, but a lot of it boils down to anticipatory grief for the loss of things that they haven't lost yet. And this is an example of what you're talking about. The brain creating, based on all the information we're being fed about how bad the world is, how bad our lives are, how bad the economy is, how bad, everything. And the logical outcome from that, there is a grief. We are in, after the pandemic, as a society, we were never given the opportunity to mourn the loss. And we all lost something. Many of us lost friends. I lost my mom during that time. Many of us lost friends and loved ones. But even if you didn't lose a person, we all lost a way of life. And we all lost freedoms. And we've never been given the opportunity to mourn that loss. It doesn't have to be a big outward expression, just the acknowledgement that something is different. And that loss, the inability or the lack of healing from that contributes to the anticipatory grief of what comes next. So a lot of people, and you look at the statistics, pharmaceuticals are, more people are antidepressants and anti-anxiety drugs and all these things. And it's a perfect example of what you're saying is that based on the unresolved grief of our past, and even if the pandemic hadn't have happened, we still had other things to grieve. There is the brain, our brains, collective brains, are creating futures that look very dark, very fearful, and we feel like we're bumping up against that darkness and that fear with no way out. And what our ancestors have always said and what the science now is saying may not be able to change what's happening in the world. We definitely have 100% ability, and I will use the word to control, our response to the world that's happening. And I think that's a big part of what we're all learning right now.
Yeah, it just goes back to the Hermetic principle of as within, so without. And as you were speaking to the entanglement and everything earlier, I love that quote from Wayne Dyer, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change.
Yeah.
And I think we're so caught in this time-space reality and the future-based propositions. We're trying to control things externally with the mind and the logic, but you're speaking to a deeper knowing where you can actually collapse those things within your heart, a deeper knowing, the wisdom that is born from your heart, and take actions from that intuitive place instead. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And we've always heard Earth is a school. And we haven't even had that conversation.
Some of us have, not everyone.
The esoteric traditions.
Yeah.
Actually the simulation theory, this was what really drew me into the simulation theory, because when you look at a simulation, the purpose of a simulation, we use them all the time, is to learn something in a relatively safe environment that you're going to need when you go somewhere else. Then you look at the similarity, look at the ancient traditions and how a simulation works. A simulation has a beginning and an end. It has rules that you learn in the simulation, and if you follow those rules, you are more successful in that simulation. In a simulation, you always have a way to connect with someone outside of the simulation for guidance. So if you're in a cockpit flight simulator or a lunar lander simulator or whatever, and you run into a problem, you pick up the headset and you say, hey guys, I've got a reading here. What's it mean? You look at what we're experiencing now. Our universe has a beginning, it has an end. Our life has a beginning, our life has an end. Every indigenous tradition tells us this is a temporary world of illusion. The Hindus actually say the word Maya means illusion. That we're here learning something that we're going to need in another world that we're going to. And when we get into trouble, we don't have a headset, but we've got our hearts where we access something outside of the dimensionality or outside the simulation for help. Higher self, guides, angels, passed on ancestors, whatever you want to call it. But the key is it all happens through the heart. So in a very real sense, the definition of a simulation fits our lived experience. And if you look at it from a spiritual perspective, even more so. And I think this is, again, one of those places where science and spirituality come together in a useful way. Not that we judge what we've done in the past, because I think we've done the best we could do with what we know, but now we know more. And once you know it, you cannot unknow it. So you have to make a choice. You either discount the new information, you blow it off and you say, I don't believe it, or you embrace it and you change your life and your belief system to accommodate the new information. And I don't think there's right or wrong, but I think that's up for everybody right now. The new information is flooding the field, and we have to determine what we're going to embrace and how we will change our lives based on that.
There's innumerable examples we could give that are breaking what the boundaries we thought were for human potential, such as what we've been speaking to about the heart and the memory, also precognition and this foreknowledge of events before they transpire.
Sure.
Very intriguing into what this potential simulation is made out of. And then, it really points to the possibility of realizing our superhumanness, how we can live an extraordinary life. And I mean, maybe it's not just being superhuman, it's just being human without boundaries and realizing that. So I would love for you to share any thoughts there, but I also want to dive a little bit deeper into, we talked about trauma. You touched on your personal journey a little bit with your father. I think that really translates also for our viewers as well, how you've been able to, in the memories that were stored in the neurites in your heart that live there, that, the pain that you had, but you've gone to transform yourself in so many beautiful ways.
Well, I'm a work in progress. I don't think you ever, the healing is a journey. It's not a destination. I think we've all heard that before. I think we heal to the degree that we're capable of embodying the healing in a moment in time. And this surprises a lot of people. I know people who go to therapy and they go, okay, well, that's healed. And a couple of years later, it lights up again. They said, well, damn, I thought it was healed. Well, it was healed at the level that your awareness would allow that healing in the moment. And now that you are a different person, you have new experiences, new relationships, now you are available for a deeper and even deeper healing. I don't talk about it a lot, but it's not a secret. I am the product of a very dysfunctional, abusive, alcoholic family. My father was the abuser. I have a younger brother, 4 years younger. He and my mom and I got the bad end of the alcoholism. And my father left our family when I was 10 to my great joy. There was a freedom that came from him leaving on the one hand, and on the other hand, it set in the path a search for me to recreate family because I had lost family. So I entered into very adult situations early in life in an attempt to recreate family. Personal relationships, business relationships. I lied about my age, my family. We were more than broke. We were living in government subsidized housing that I'm very grateful for. My mom had not been in the workforce because she'd been a stay-at-home mom. And there really wasn't any child support or alimony or anything like that. So not enough to be of use. So I lied about my age and went to work in a factory illegally at the time, making union wages. It was good money that I was making to contribute to the family. And all of that, I think, and actually left home at the age of 14 and moved in with my rock and roll band, which is illegal now. And there was a whole process and a lot of problems that came from that. This was in the 60s. And everybody in the band was a lot older. I was 14. They were all in their 20s and 30s. So it was an eye-opener for me in terms of what was possible in the world. And I was blessed, André, to have what I call a strong soul compass, because I watched what was happening. I didn't participate. I didn't do the drugs. I watched people's lives destroyed by the drugs and their amazing gifts and talents. These are musicians and poets, and they just became worthless because the drugs destroyed their minds. I became the designated everything. I was living with the band, and they knew I didn't drink. I didn't do any drugs, so they'd take me along just to get them home safely. And I learned a lot, during that time about personal responsibility, and I was reading on a search. At that time, spirituality was all about like Edgar Cayce and, the Many Mansions books that he wrote. And there was one book that has stayed with me. The day my dad left, my mom came to me and she handed me a book, and she said, I don't know how, but I think this is going to be useful to you. And the book was called The Prophet by a Lebanese poet. His name was Khalil Gibran. And it's pretty deep. Each chapter was couple of pages long, but it was really, really deep. And the one piece that stayed with me was he had a chapter on work. And what he said was, work is love made visible. And if you've ever communicated with me, it's at the bottom of every email. It's on books that I write. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. Because I was surrounded with people that hated their jobs. In the factory, didn't like what they were doing. They just needed the money. And that's a perspective, and I understand that. It wasn't always pleasant work. But for example, one of the jobs I had was loading boxcars with 50-pound bags of Purina cat food and dog food. So each bag was 50 pounds. And I worked nights. So I worked the night shift from 4 p.m. to 4 a.m. And then I'd go home, sleep a couple hours, do some homework, and then go to school the next day. No time for a workout. And I said, you know what? If I do this right, those 50-pound bags, man, you can get a good workout. So I'd lift them one way, and I'd do upper body, and I'd lift them another way, and great quads. So I was getting paid. I had a great workout. I had a job, and we had money for the family. That was my love made visible. The guy I was working with, he hated this job, and he would just do the bare minimum he had to do to get by, and sometimes he wouldn't even do that. And I'd pick up the slack for him because it was our responsibility to load the boxcar. But that was an example of those words, work is love made visible. I personally believe if we're going to say yes, work is our spiritual energy. We're spiritual beings. Whatever we do is our spiritual energy manifesting in this world. If I say yes to something like an interview with André, I'm going to say yes 1,000,000%. I want to do a really good job. I'm not going to say a half of a yes and do a half-assed job, because I betrayed my truest nature if I do that. And I don't think I would have learned those lessons if my father had stayed, because life would not have been as difficult as it was. So there's a lot to that, and it set me on I've always had a strong soul compass, and I was reading the books that were available on spirituality, because in ancient civilizations, I began reading not long after that books by a man named David Hatcher Childress, who was hitchhiking across the world looking at ancient civilizations, and now he's my friend. I get to see him at conferences together, and he turned me on to Machu Picchu and the pyramids and the Sphinx and all those things, and there was a strong link between the sites and the traditions underlying those sites, those spiritual principles, and they all speak to our divinity and our humanness and what we're capable of and what's possible, what we've known in the past that maybe we've forgotten, or what we're learning now that we've never known about ourselves, at least in recorded history. So it all comes together, I think, in a really beautiful way. And it's not separate from. I don't see what I do as separate from what I am. And the trauma from those experiences is something it still shows up, and it's still, there's still a healing process that's going on. One of the aspects of trauma, every experience, every emotion that we have creates a chemical in our body. There's a chemical equivalent for every emotion, and it's called a neuropeptide, is what it is. And when we have joyous experiences, those neuropeptides metabolize and they flow right out of the body, no problem, which is what they're designed to do. When we have experiences that we don't have the tools to address, if you're 3 years old or 5 years old and you're in an abusive family, you don't have the tools at 5 years old, but you still have those chemicals in your body. So our bodies are so smart. What happens is, I'll just paraphrase, the body says, oh, you don't have the tools right now, so we're going to store this chemical for you. We're going to park it in a place in the body, and usually the chemical is parked in the organ or the tissue associated with the trauma. So if it is around a lot of hurt and suffering, it might be in the heart. Sexual trauma is around sexual organs. Women, it can be breast, uterus, men, prostate issues, but you don't know this consciously. So your body says, we're going to park these neuropeptides until you have the tools to heal and metabolize. And the body doesn't know the difference between an hour after the trauma and 60 years after the trauma. It's all there. And this is why, if we don't address those traumas, then they can become inflammation in those organs, just to get our attention. And if the inflammation is not acknowledged, then it can become what we call disease. All in an effort, it's a very different way of looking at the body, but all in an effort of recognizing this dialogue, this conversation. We're in constant dialogue with our bodies if we have the wisdom to know what our bodies are saying. And what the science is showing is rarely are our bodies ever broken. What we see as disease is our bodies in the presence of what we've given the body to work with. So when you begin to think from that perspective, then healing takes on a whole new meaning. It's one of the reasons breath work is so powerful. Breath work is a powerful lubricant for those neuropeptides. Heart-brain coherence. When you can create the coherence, then the experience is present without the rightness or the wrongness or the goodness or the badness or the guilt or the worthiness or the not worthiness of the brain. And that shift is enough to free those neuropeptides and allow them to metabolize in the body. And how you know they're metabolizing is they'll typically metabolize through body fluids. So you might feel like have a metallic taste in your mouth. Literally are trace metals metabolizing out of the, when you work with breath work and you work with other people and you're close enough to them, their breath will smell like metal, smell like a tin can. And that's one of the reasons your pee will smell funny. You'll pass these through, the urine will smell funny right after a breath work session. Tears, perspiration, any kind of body fluids is how these neuropeptides will metabolize through the body. And I'm saying this because it's an ongoing healing. It's an ongoing process. So, and it's something that we all have access to. And heart-brain coherence that I described is one of the very powerful tools that will take us to those deeper levels of healing when we're ready to go there. Does that make sense if I say it that way?
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know we were going to talk about this. But.
Yeah. No, it absolutely does. And thank you so much for sharing your story. And there's just so much power in that and the decision from what you would say maybe is your soul's strong compass, but to even do work that you may not perceive as externally so impactful in the world, whether it's lifting heavy things, but the difference between you and your coworker Is it what you guys are doing the same thing, but who you were being for yourself while you were doing it was completely different?
It is. I just want to round out the story with my father.
Yeah.
I don't want to leave any bad feelings. And also an invitation for people to trust their intuition. I didn't know my dad well. After he left, we talked rarely, and he didn't have an answering machine. So if I wanted to talk to him, I would call him. If he wasn't there, I had no way to leave a message, and this is before cell phones. And in January of 2003, I took a group to India. Actually, I came through this city, through LA, and we went through the John Bradley terminal in LAX. I forgot I'm in LA, so this is where this story happened. Maybe that's why it's with me. So I checked the whole group in for India. We had about 90 minutes before we boarded on the plane. They went, and I walked, and maybe you know where this is. I walked through this part of John Bradley terminal, and there was a bank of pay telephones. It's not there anymore. A whole row of pay telephones. And I was walking by there, and honest to God, it was like this force that wouldn't let me keep walking. And I kept turning around and thought, well, what the hell is going on, you know? And I went within briefly, and I said, what is this? And I got the image of my dad. And so I walked over to the pay phone. I had quarters, used to put them in, and I called my dad, and he picked up the phone. My father he never called me son. And that was a source of hurt for me. There's a whole story behind that. Everybody else did. My employees, all my employers, well, son, let me tell you this, you know, or my Southern friends, hey, son, let me tell you this, you know. But I didn't get it from my dad. So I called my dad, and I said, I'm taking the group to India. But when I get back in a couple of weeks, my publisher is taking me on a book tour through your city. Would you like to have dinner together? And he said, yes, son, I would love to do that. So I got home in the wee hours of the morning, and there was a message from my brother that said, call me. And I called him, and he said, Dad's gone. He died. And I never had that dinner. But the fact that I followed my intuition and picked up the phone and had my father call me son, and we had that healing, would never have happened if I had kept walking and denied that intuition. And for me, that was the healing. Everything was okay. He called me son. I got to hear it. Probably better than the dinner. The dinner probably would have been a very quiet dinner. I don't know what we would have talked about. But I think for me, it's important on a lot of levels, but it was important confirmation for us all. When you get the hit to communicate with someone, follow the hit. And when you want to tell someone you love them, don't wait until the right moment. Just tell them when you feel like you need to tell them, because the truth is we don't know. We don't know. And so for me, that was a beautiful completion to what my father and I had been through. And I'm sure on a karmic level, there's a lot of other things going on. And someday on the other side, I get to check it out with him, I guess. When the simulation times out and we're on the other side, I'll say, what the hell was that all about, you know? But I want to follow up so people have a good feeling about, about what happened. And it was difficult, but I'm not sorry for the life that it led to.
So powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that. I got chills, and just, I'm glad you listened to your intuitive hit, because I think many people have had similar experiences where they listened to it and got rewarded, or some cases they didn't listen to it and they missed the precious opportunity.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So powerful, man. In that intuition, the power of our heart, where it pulls us in a certain direction, where it's subtle, oftentimes whispers to us into a certain direction. It's so beautiful to listen to that and to strengthen the relationship to our ability to listen to that and live our life from that place.
Well, what the studies show this, if someone pops into your mind, you're probably in theirs at the same time. If you're thinking about somebody, they're probably thinking about you as well. This just happened last night. There is a a guy that I work with in another part of this country. I hadn't heard from him since the new year. He was on my mind packing for this trip. Yesterday I traveled to LA. He was on my mind. I got to my hotel room last night, and he left me a voice message and said, "Gregg, you've been on my mind all for the last couple of days." He goes, "I can understand it, but I'd love to talk to you. Call me when you get back." So I will call him when I get back. But I just had to laugh. I said, "Well, of course he called me because I've been on his mind and he's been on my mind, you know." And I think these things happen. They're subtle. And we often discount those subtle experiences. And I think part of our mastery is in honing and refining those subtle experiences. For example, we go into the heart to ask the heart a question. Many people will formulate the answer that they want in their mind rather than allowing the answer to come to them. So I'm inviting our community, if you're going to do these things or when you do these things, when you ask your heart, don't chase the answer. And it will typically be present very quickly. But if it's not, don't chase it. Allow that answer to come to you. And there is a skill to learning to do that, to learning to listen. Because not everyone's heart communicates with them in the same way. I'm hesitating because of the length of time that we have here. Can I share a quick story?
Yeah.
We were in a live event. There were probably 1,500 people in the room. And you know, when you're on the stage, you really can't, because of the lights, you can't see beyond the first row or two. And I was on the stage and I could see there was a woman on the first row, and we had gone through some deep heart experiences. People were sharing on the mics, you know, this happened, that happened, this happened. And this woman she was sitting there and she was like this, she had furrowed eyebrows. And from the stage, I called her out and I said, are you okay? What's up? She said, me? And I said, yeah. And she goes, well, nothing happened for me when I was in my heart. And I said, well, how do you know? She goes, look at what all these people are saying. I didn't get, you know, my ancestors didn't come to me and, you know, and my angels didn't come to me. And I said, well, did anything happen at all? And she says, no. And I said, did you see anything in your mind's eye? And she goes, yeah, I saw a damn tree. And I said, well, tell me about the tree. And she says, it was just a tree. And I said, what did it look like? Was it the same? She goes, well, sometimes it had leaves, sometimes it didn't. And I said, when did it have the leaves? So we went back through and I'd asked a series of questions, and it turned out that the leaves were on the tree when the answer was yes to the questions. And when the answer was no, it was a bare tree. I said, just out of curiosity, what's your profession? She says, I'm a gardener. And I said, there you go. Your life is in communion with plants, with the plant kingdom. I said, you're not hearing about angels and ascended masters. I said, your tree is what you know. Your tree is talking to you. The green, apparently for you, is green leaves on the tree is yes, it's an affirmative. And who knows where it'll go? No leaves is a no, and I don't know how deep it goes after that. She had never thought about that because she was comparing herself to everyone else rather than allowing her own experience to be present. And I think it's important for all of us because we all communicate differently with this field, and her perceptual world was through the plant kingdom. And once she heard that, she had a big smile. It was the best workshop she ever had. And I felt good. I felt good because I was drawn, of all those people in the room, I zeroed right in on her. And not just because she was on the front row, but I could see her and I could feel that something was going on.
So powerful. I'm just reflecting on so much of the insights today. We've been recording for almost 4 hours now. And, you know, there's been a lot of really potent insights and reflections for myself, and the power of the heart, the intuition. And I really love the analogy you gave of the who you are and what you're doing not being different, and the work being made love, you know, work being love made visible, in that way, and how we can all strive to create that in our life, and the pursuit of, you know, this service to others, where oftentimes we're fed in a society that rewards service to self. And As we start to head towards closing out, I'm just curious what you think about the difference between the two, how we can kind of make our service to others and service to self collapse and be the same to where
Sure.
it's, yeah.
Yeah, I think it is. I think to the degree that we honor ourselves and become the best version of ourselves, by virtue of doing that, we create the best possible world. Now, within that, there are people of different constitutions, for whatever reason, who are compelled to serve in different ways. There are a lot of studies suggesting that DNA, genetics, some populations are more compelled to serve and be in public service, and others are more behind the scenes or, under the radar. But in the field, it's all in the field. And what I'd like to do is just leave our family, if I can call this our family. It is our community, but you're all my family. With this, that every time one of us has the wisdom to know that we have a choice and the courage to choose, but that's not enough, then the strength to follow through with that choice and become a better version of ourselves. What we do is we build a bridge into that field that makes it a little easier for the next and a little easier for the next. I think this is the beauty of what the avatars, the Master Jesus, this is what Jesus, when Jesus walked this earth, and I've spent a lot of my life studying Jesus as a man. His name was Yeshua, not Jesus. That was later on, so Yeshua. And his mysteries. There are 18 years, they say, that are missing. Well, they're missing because the records of where and how he studied were taken out of the public view. During those 18 years, he journeyed into the highlands of central China, what we now know as Tibet, and he's noted there, the monks and the nuns, they talked to me about him. He's noted because he studied and mastered in one lifetime, in just a few years, what it would typically take someone an entire lifetime just there. And then he left there and he went to India and he studied and mastered those traditions. And he went into Egypt and the Osiris traditions and he studied and mastered those. This is why he was noted in those different traditions. And then when he began to share what he had learned and he lived it in his life, he became a living bridge that makes it easier for others. And he said this. I mean, he said, if you're to believe the text, he says, you will do what I'm doing and more. So I'm paraphrasing, but essentially what I'm doing and more. The oldest records of the New Testament were found in 1948 in what is called the Nag Hammadi Library in Egypt.
Discovered what, just like 80 years ago or something?
Yeah, well, the oldest records of the Old Testament were found a few years earlier in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And then the oldest records of the New, I mean, you can't make this up. It's perfect symmetry. The oldest records of the New Testament were found in Egypt, in Nag Hammadi. I mean, the story behind it, there aren't many trees and not much firewood in Egypt. And a young Bedouin boy was told by his mom, go find some kindling so we can heat the house and have some food. He was very resourceful, and he remembered that in an old tomb, there were clay jars full of papyrus, and he started bringing the papyrus home, and we don't know how many were burned and destroyed before the authorities found out. And they preserved what was left. It became known as the Nag Hammadi Library. It's controversial because it has records of the books that the Catholic Church omitted during the Council of Nicaea in the 4th century when they created the biblical canon. And it's because of that we now know, like the women in the Bible, the Gospel of Mary, Book 1 and Book 2, and Thunder Perfect Mind, which was written by a female Gnostic. It's very powerful.
Gospel of Thomas.
Gospel of Thomas is where I was going with this. The Gospel of Thomas is 114 quotes that Thomas Didymus scribed as he followed the Master. Thomas Didymus means Thomas the twin. And there now is a school of thought and a lot of controversy as to whether or not Jesus had a twin or who Thomas was the twin of.
Well, he had a brother.
Yeah, yeah. So the point in those 114 sayings is they may be the closest that we have to the actual words, maybe more so than the traditional New Testament, in the Gospel of Thomas. And he essentially, Yeshua says, what you're seeing me doing, I'm laying the foundation so that you will do these things and more. So the point of, and that's, I think, something we can all relate to. So every time one of us chooses, has the wisdom to recognize we have a choice, we're not stuck. Number two, we're only defined by our past if we choose to be. And I think that's the powerful lesson my father left for me. I have a younger brother, 4 years younger. Same parents, we're like night and day. If he were here, we look different, we think different. His life has been very difficult because he believed so many of the things that he heard about himself in the abusive relationship that weren't true. His soul compass led him in a different path. But I think that when we have those experiences, we have to have the wisdom to recognize we have a choice, the strength to make the choice, but we can't stop there. That we've got to be able to follow it through. And every time one of us does that in our lives, we're creating a bridge in the field for another person somewhere on the planet. You may never know who they are, but energetically, we make it a little easier for them to have that wisdom and the courage to choose and the strength to see it through. And in that way, I think we uplift one another in ways that we'll never know. So if we're looking for external validation, you probably aren't going to find it. But if we are striving to become the best version of ourselves and hold ourselves accountable in a way that's kind and forgiving, but honest and true, that's, I think, how we, as a global family, it's how we love one another through our actions and how we help one another become the best versions of ourselves. And when we do that, that's how we create the best world possible. I don't think we could ask any more of ourselves from that other than doing it in that way. Does that make sense if I say it that way?
It does, yeah. It's all made great sense.
Well, thank you.
It's almost too much sense.
Well, maybe we'll do a part 3 at some point.
I'm sure there will be 3, 4, 5. This whole conversation, part of it reminds me of that saying that wisdom tells me I'm nothing, love tells me I am everything, and between the two, my life flows. And from simulation theory to entanglement to the power of the heart, it's just weaving this tapestry of this conversation is so many potent reminders for myself first and foremost, but I'm sure with the family that are tuning in as well, that gives a reflection and a narrative into the truth of how powerful we really are. And so I just want to share 2 reflections to you personally as we start to close out. One's shallow, one's deep. Which one do you want first?
Well, before you do that, sure. I want to reiterate what you're saying. It's that power that is making it worthwhile for those forces to veil our power from us, to attempt to veil our power by stealing our very humanness. There is a battle for our humanness because there's a conduit to our divinity. But we don't have to fight that battle. We just live the truth of what it means to be human, the best version of ourselves, and we have triumphed over that battle. And that's a very different way of thinking of combat against combat. This is transcendence, leaving that darkness in the dust. And I think that's precisely where we're going in this world right now. So thank you for the opportunity to share that.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm ready.
Wonderful. Just 2 quick things. You want the shallow or the deep one?
Oh man, let's do the deep one first, and the shallow one we'll leave on the laughter.
I love that. One of the lines from the Gospel of Thomas that we just mentioned was saying whether or not it was Jesus will be to be yet to be fully seen or confirmed. But one of them is, if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. And if you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you.
Exactly.
And I see your life as such a powerful representation of bringing forth what is within you. And the reflection I just want to share is that when we do that, when we go on that path of bringing forth what is within us, by you living in your dharma and your purpose, you give so many people the possibility to live in theirs and the reflection of theirs. And so the ripples that your work has done and your insight and really your heart, most fundamentally, is just the ripples are felt in the cosmos for all of eternity. So thank you for the work that you're doing.
What you don't know is it's really good for me to hear that, because it's been a tough few months, a lot of loss. And when you lose your parents, it's especially your mom that you've come through. We'll all have that experience, at some point. But it's mentally, my man brain thought I was ready for it, but there's a part of me that just kicked my ass, and then I'm losing a lot of friends, and certainly we're all losing a way of life. So it's been a tough few months, and it's really good for me to hear that, and I appreciate it very much. Very, very much needed, very healing. So thank you for following your intuition to say that.
Yeah, thank you, man. And I can also just feel the emotion in your heart and behind your eyes about how much your family, your parents, and your mom meant to you. And
I'm not going to cry because I'm a Cancerian male. If I cry, my voice changes. So I'm not going to do that, but thank you.
Cry. No. Of course. Yeah. I mean, it feels, it rings true. And the shallow one was, I saw in a comment that I thought was hilarious. It said that Gregg's hair looks like he's constantly blowing his own mind.
I saw that as well. And somebody did an AI. I just got it. I usually don't travel the day after a cut. It was cut yesterday before I was traveling. So not as much of it as there has been. I'm just happy it's still there.
It's a beautiful mane.
And thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, of course.
Well, Wayne Dyer, my brother Wayne Dyer, before he left this world, we were on a cruise ship together in the Caribbean. And he very famously said, he had a very beautiful, shiny, bald head. And he said, this bald head is a solar panel for a sex machine. So that was a solar panel. He was a sex machine. And I said, well, I don't have a bald head, but I said, this mane of hair, these are highly refined micro antennae to higher dimensions of the state space that inform me every day of my life. And we used to laugh about that a lot. So thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's just this whole conversation has been so fulfilling. I thoroughly love the hours diving into these deep conversations with you. So thank you for coming on our platform and sharing yourself fully 100% and just really committing to it with that full yes.
Yeah, well, I want to take this opportunity to thank you for creating a platform, because what you have done is you are the hub of a community, and community is even more important than we used to think. After the lockdowns, they moved the power of community to number 2. The first thing, we all need water, certainly, but we don't need food. We can go days without food. It's hard for us to go for days without human connection. And a lot of people lost their lives discovering that for themselves. So I want to thank you for the wisdom to recognize it was possible, the courage to choose, but that's not enough. You had the strength to follow it through. You built a beautiful studio. You're a dear brother, a good man with a good heart. And what you're doing is giving a home to people's souls who are looking for somewhere to make sense in this crazy world that we live in. And I'm honored to be a part of that today. You've done a beautiful job. So thank you, my brother.
Thank you so much, Gregg.
You're very welcome.
New brother was born today, and I'm just looking forward for the many weavings to come. Thank you so much. It means a lot. And I feel it's the ultimate privilege and honor to do what I can to help steward and, this community that's building, which is really beautiful to feel into as we started out in the very beginning of this conversation of the battle for our humanness. The beat of humanity is still well and alive and is very felt in this collective humanity that's coming together.
We will triumph. We are. We just go through it and see it through. So thank you. I look forward to our next very much.
Absolutely. Very last thing, anything that you have going on where people can find you, what you'd like to share with our audience, anything there?
I have taken some time off to work on a book that is a year overdue. So there's not a lot going on right now. I'm close to home. It's been nice, André. I am able to see the trees bloom in my community. I'm usually out of the country during this time of year. I'm able to see friends. They have babies. They have new homes. They have parents that are leaving this world, and I've had the opportunity to be a little closer to home in a way that I haven't for almost 20 years. So I'm enjoying that. I will begin traveling mid-year. Go to our website, greggbraden.com, and August, September, October, I'm doing a lot of traveling domestically. North America, domestically. No oceans between me and my home in 2024. So thank you for the opportunity to share that.
Thank you so much. Yep. Of course, absolutely. All right, everyone. Thanks for coming on this journey together of remembering who we are and what we're capable of and living our life with that courage and strength. Thank you so much for coming on this journey. Until next time, be well.